The stars above the galaxy shone brightly, as if celebrating the grand triumph of the galactic fleet. They had just won the battle of a lifetime, defeating a powerful alien force that had threatened the peace of many worlds. The alien race, known for their advanced weapons and ruthless tactics, had been pushed back into the far corners of the galaxy. It was a victory that would be remembered for centuries. Captain Eric stood on the bridge of the fleet's flagship, watching the stars twinkle beyond the viewports. His face, usually calm and composed, now showed a rare smile. He had led his fleet through countless battles, but this one felt different. This was a decisive victory. His fleet had finally wiped out the last remnants of the enemy's stronghold, ensuring peace for millions of people across the galaxy. Beside him, Lieutenant Kara was also looking out at the stars, but her eyes were focused on the reports coming in from the various ships in the fleet. The enemy was beaten, their fleets scattered, their weapons destroyed. It had been a long, grueling battle, but in the end, the galactic fleet had emerged victorious. The enemy's homeworld, once a heavily fortified fortress, now lay in ruins. The survivors had surrendered, and peace had finally been restored to this corner of the galaxy. "Captain," Lieutenant Kara said, turning toward him, "the fleet is ready to celebrate. We've earned it." Eric nodded. "Yes, they deserve a moment of joy. But we can't let our guard down just yet. There are always more threats out there." The bridge crew, hearing this, turned toward him with smiles on their faces. They knew their captain's cautious nature, but they also knew this was a moment to savor. After so many years of war and uncertainty, they had finally won. The galactic fleet had proven their strength, their unity, and their resolve. "Sir, the communications officer is trying to reach you," Kara said. Eric turned, his expression now serious. "Patch it through." A voice crackled over the comms, sounding both urgent and distant. "Captain Eric, this is Commander Davi from Intelligence. We've intercepted a strange signal. It's from Earth, and it's a warning." "Earth," Eric repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of warning?" "Something big is coming from their direction," Davy continued. "We can't be sure yet, but we think it's related to their new fleet. They're calling it the Dreadnoughts." The word hung in the air like a dark cloud. Earth, the homeworld of humanity, had always been a distant part of the galaxy, but their military forces were growing. Eric knew that Earth had been working on new warships for some time. He had heard rumors of something powerful, something that could change the balance of power. "A fleet of dreadnoughts," Kara muttered under her breath. "That doesn't sound good." Eric frowned. "What do we know about these ships, Commander?" "They're massive," Davy replied. "Built for one purpose: destruction. The technology they're rumored to use is unlike anything we've seen before. We've only gotten pieces of information, but I believe they have weapons capable of piercing our best shields." Captain Eric paced across the bridge. Victory felt sweet, but now there was a new threat on the horizon. Earth's dreadnoughts could be the beginning of a new war, one they might not be ready for. "Are we certain about this?" Eric asked, his voice low and serious. "We don't have full details, but it's a legitimate concern, sir," Davy replied. "We need to prepare for the worst." "Very well," Eric said. "Tell the fleet to stand down from celebrations. We need to be ready for whatever Earth is sending our way. Inform all command officers to stay alert." The bridge crew immediately sprang into action, the cheerful atmosphere now replaced by a sense of urgency. The celebration had to end. The victory they had won was still fresh in their minds, but Eric knew it would not last. There was something out there, something powerful, and it was coming. Lieutenant Kara walked up beside him. "Do you think Earth will send these dreadnoughts against us?" "I don't know," Eric said, his voice steady, though there was a hint of concern behind his words. "But we have to be ready for anything." As the fleet moved into position, Captain Eric's thoughts drifted back to Earth. The humans had always been unpredictable, and now they had something new, a weapon that could change everything. The victory was theirs for now, but the next battle might be the one that decides the fate of the galaxy. In the distance, the stars continued to twinkle, indifferent to the struggles of those below. But for Eric and his fleet, the calm before the storm had just begun. The Galactic fleet had barely begun to regroup when the strange signal from Earth came through again. This time, it was more urgent, more insistent, as if the message was trying to break through the very fabric of space itself. Captain Eric paced the bridge of the flagship, his eyes scanning the data scrolling across the holographic displays. The fleet was still basking in the glow of victory, but something about the warning felt different. It was not the kind of message a victorious fleet wanted to receive. "Captain, we've decoded more of the message," Commander Davy said, his voice tense as he worked at his station. "It's clear now. Earth's fleet is on the move. They're not just sending one or two ships. They're sending a whole armada." Eric's brow furrowed. "An armada? From Earth? That's impossible. We've never seen them build anything of that scale." "They've been working on it for years," Davy replied, his eyes not leaving the screen. "And from what we've intercepted, they've just finished building the most powerful ships they've ever created, the Dreadnoughts. These are warships capable of taking down entire fleets, and they're heading straight for us." "Straight for us?" Lieutenant Kara asked, her voice low. She couldn't believe it. The Galactic fleet had just defeated a major alien threat, and now, out of nowhere, Earth was sending something far more dangerous. Eric ran a hand through his hair, trying to keep his calm. He'd faced many dangers in his career, but the thought of Earth's dreadnoughts was unlike anything he had ever dealt with. Humanity had always been a distant player in galactic politics. They were still a young race by galactic standards, but their advancements were catching up quickly. Now, with these new dreadnoughts, they were no longer a mere threat. They were a looming shadow over the entire galaxy. "I want a full briefing on these ships," Eric ordered. "We need to know everything we can about Earth's dreadnoughts. Davy, get in touch with every intelligence network we have. Find out what we're dealing with." "Already on it, sir," Davy said. Kara stood silently by Eric's side, looking out at the vast expanse of space. Her mind raced. The fleet had just come off a hard-fought victory, and now they were facing a threat far more dangerous than any alien army. Earth had always been an ally, but this felt different. "We need to prepare," Eric said, his voice firm. "Tell the fleet to get ready for battle. We don't know when these dreadnoughts will arrive, but we need to be ready for anything." The command was given, and soon, the fleet's crew was bustling with activity. Ships began to move into formation. Weapons were checked and double-checked, and every officer prepared for the possibility of a confrontation with Earth's new fleet. The mood on the bridge shifted from celebration to something far more serious. The victory had been sweet, but it was over. The threat from Earth was real, and it was coming fast. Hours passed, and the tension on the flagship grew. Eric and Kara stood side by side, staring out into the void. Neither of them spoke, but both knew that something had changed. The galaxy had always been full of threats, but the Earth dreadnoughts were a different kind of challenge. They weren't just another alien force. They were humans, a race that had once been considered too small, too young, to be a serious threat. Now they had something that could rival even the strongest galactic forces. As the fleet prepared, Eric couldn't help but wonder, why had Earth decided to send these ships? Were they angry about something? Were they looking to conquer, or was there something more behind this sudden show of power? He couldn't answer that, but one thing was clear: the galactic fleet would have to face the dreadnoughts head-on. Suddenly, the comms officer's voice broke through the silence. "Captain, we've got another transmission from Earth." Eric turned sharply. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and a stern face appeared. It was Commander Michael, an officer from Earth's fleet who Eric had met during earlier diplomatic missions. Michael's expression was grave, and he didn't waste any time. "Captain Eric, this is Commander Michael of Earth's forces. I have come to warn you. Earth's dreadnoughts are on their way. We have no intention of engaging in an open war, but our new fleet will not be ignored. I suggest you prepare yourselves for what's coming. We've already sent our ships toward your position. There is no turning back now." The message was short, blunt, and unsettling. It confirmed everything Dottie had feared. Earth was not coming to negotiate. They were coming to demonstrate their power. Eric stared at the screen, his face stone cold. This was no longer about an enemy that could be defeated with tactics alone. This was a battle of strength, of sheer will, and the galaxy was about to learn just how powerful Earth had become. "Davy," Eric said, breaking the silence, "get me every piece of information you can about Earth's dreadnoughts. We're going to need it." The message from Earth hung in the air like a cold, hard truth. Earth's dreadnoughts were coming. And with them, the balance of power in the galaxy would be forever changed. The hours that followed Commander Michael's transmission were filled with a strange mix of preparation and nervous anticipation. The Galactic Fleet was now fully aware of the looming threat. Earth's dreadnoughts were coming, and they were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Despite the initial shock, Captain Eric kept a calm exterior, focusing on what needed to be done. There was no time for fear, only action. The flagship's command deck was busy. Officers moved quickly, preparing for the worst. Eric stood at the helm, scanning the data feeds, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the strange warning from Earth. Why had they built these ships? What had happened to change Earth's peaceful stance? And most importantly, how could they defeat a fleet so powerful? "Sir," Lieutenant Kara spoke up from behind him, her voice breaking the silence. "The fleet's ready for whatever comes next, but there's something strange. Our sensors are picking up something massive, far beyond our initial expectations." Eric turned, narrowing his eyes. "What do you mean by massive?" Kara's face was tense. "It's unlike anything we've encountered before. The sensors are barely handling the size of these ships. The readings are off the charts." Eric's stomach tightened. He had known that Earth's dreadnoughts were powerful, but he had no idea they were this powerful. "What are we talking about here? Are we facing a fleet of these dreadnoughts?" Kara hesitated. "Yes, sir, but it's not just the number. The energy readings, they're enormous. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it." The room grew quieter as the reality of the situation set in. Earth's dreadnoughts weren't just large warships. They were forces of nature, massive ships capable of unleashing unimaginable destruction. Eric had fought against entire fleets before, but the thought of facing ships of this scale was unsettling. "Activate the long-range scanners," Eric ordered. "Let's see what we're up against." The bridge crew worked quickly, focusing their attention on the main screen. The stars outside seemed to shimmer as the long-range sensors calibrated and began to display the incoming ships. Eric's heart skipped a beat when the first image appeared on the screen. It was enormous. The dreadnoughts were massive, dwarfing the Galactic Fleet's largest ships. Their shapes were angular, built for power and speed, with thick armor plating and intimidating weapon systems. The energy readings spiked as the ships approached, their engines burning bright with raw power. "By the stars," Kara whispered, "I've never seen anything like this before." The sheer size of the ships was enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. The flagship alone seemed like a toy compared to these massive war machines. The dreadnoughts' advanced shields radiated energy, and even from this distance, it was clear they would be difficult to penetrate. Each one was a fortress in space. Eric's mind raced. He had faced powerful enemies, but this felt different. This wasn't just another battle. The dreadnoughts weren't just ships. They were a statement. Earth was showing the galaxy that it was no longer a backwater planet. Earth had power now, and that power was aimed squarely at the heart of the galaxy. "Commander Davi," Eric called out, "what's the status on the intelligence reports? We need more information on their weapon systems." Davy's voice came through, tight with concern. We're still gathering details, Captain, but from what we've been able to decipher, these ships are equipped with energy weapons capable of disabling entire fleets. They have something called a graviton pulse. It's a weapon that can disrupt the gravitational fields of enemy ships, making their systems malfunction. Our shields won't protect us from it. Eric's jaw tightened. Graviton pulse. That sounded like something out of a nightmare. If Earth's dreadnoughts had the ability to disable entire fleets with a single shot, the Galactic Fleet would be in serious trouble. We're running out of time, Eric muttered. Kara, prepare the fleet for combat. I want all ships in battle formation. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. The crew quickly fell into action. Officers were coordinating fleet movements, while the engineers checked and rechecked their weapon systems. Every ship in the fleet, from the smallest destroyer to the largest cruiser, was preparing for the fight of its life. The reality of the situation was sinking in. The fleet had won its last battle, but now, Earth's dreadnoughts were coming, and there was no turning back. Eric stepped away from the command station, his mind working through possible strategies. What kind of battle are we looking at here? He thought. How do we fight against something like this? Kara walked up beside him, her expression serious. We've always found a way before, Captain. We'll find a way now. Eric looked out at the stars. He had faced countless enemies, but none had been like this. The dreadnoughts were not just powerful, they were a game changer. He knew the coming battle would be unlike anything they had ever fought before. But one thing was certain. The fleet was ready. The galaxy had faced dangers before, and it would face them again. But Earth's challenge was different. This was the test of a new age, and the fleet would rise to meet it. The tension on the flagship's bridge was unbearable. Captain Eric stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the incoming dreadnoughts as they slowly grew larger in the distance. The Galactic Fleet was now in position, each ship ready for battle, but there was a gnawing feeling in Eric's chest. How could they possibly defeat such powerful warships? These dreadnoughts weren't just ships, they were weapons of mass destruction. Lieutenant Kara stood by his side, her face grim as she studied the readouts on her console. The fleet's remaining energy reserves were being redirected to reinforce shields and power weapons, but it wasn't enough. The dreadnoughts' energy fields were beyond anything the Galactic Fleet had encountered. It was as if they were invincible. Captain, Kara spoke quietly, breaking the silence. We've lost contact with the forward squadron. They're too close to the dreadnoughts now. Our sensors are showing massive energy surges. We may not have enough time to get them back. Eric clenched his fists. The thought of losing even a single ship so soon was unbearable. He knew the cost of war, but this felt different. This was no longer a battle. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. Send a rescue team, Eric ordered. Get them back, no matter the cost. We can't afford to lose anyone just yet. Kara nodded, her face hardening. Yes, Captain. The urgency of the situation had everyone on edge. The fleet had once been a proud and powerful force, but now, facing Earth's dreadnoughts, they were feeling vulnerable. The Galactic Fleet's best ships, including their most advanced battle cruisers, were being forced to fall back, unable to penetrate the energy shields of the dreadnoughts. Even their strongest weapons seemed useless. On the lower decks of the flagship, the crew worked tirelessly to keep the ship operational. Engineers scrambled to reroute power and reinforce the ship's vital systems. Every officer, from the highest-ranking commanders to the youngest recruits, knew that the battle ahead would decide the fate of the galaxy. But no one knew if they could win. Back on the bridge, Eric was deep in thought. His mind raced through every possible scenario. What could they do to defeat the dreadnoughts? Their energy weapons were powerful, but they couldn't match the sheer force of the enemy's technology. There had to be a way. There had to be a weakness. He was snapped out of his thoughts by a sudden voice. Captain, we've got a problem, Commander Davy said, his voice tense with urgency. What is it? Eric asked, turning to face the commander. We've analyzed the dreadnoughts further, Davy explained. "They're graviton pulse weapons. They're more than just disruptive. They can target specific parts of a ship, shields, engines, weapon systems, and disable them in an instant. We won't be able to fight back if they use it on us." Eric's heart sank. The graviton pulse wasn't just a weapon. It was a game changer. If the Dreadnoughts targeted the flagship's critical systems, the fleet would be helpless. The entire battle could be lost in a single strike. "We need a countermeasure," Eric said, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "Do we have anything in our arsenal that can protect us from a graviton pulse?" Davy shook his head. "We've tried everything we know. The energy fields are too strong. Even our best shielding technology is no match for it." Eric felt a wave of frustration wash over him. They were running out of options. The Dreadnoughts were closing in fast, and the fleet's chances of survival were slipping away with each passing moment. Suddenly, Kara's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, the rescue squad is back. They'd brought some of the forward squadron ships with them, but we lost contact with several others. They're gone." Eric closed his eyes, trying to push back the frustration. He knew the cost of this battle would be high, but it didn't make the losses any easier. They had lost good people, and more would follow if they couldn't find a way to stop the Dreadnoughts. "We'll mourn them later," Eric said, his voice hardening. "For now, we fight." He looked at Kara and Davy, both of whom nodded in agreement. It was all they could do. The galaxy was depending on them. As the Dreadnoughts drew closer, the fleet prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most brutal battle in its history. But the fleet's commanders knew one thing. They had to find a way to win, no matter what it took. Eric turned to face the bridge, his voice firm as he gave the final command. "Battle stations. This is it. We fight for the galaxy." And as the fleet moved into position, the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. The stars outside seemed to mock them with their cold, indifferent light. The battle for the galaxy's future had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The first shots were fired just as the Dreadnoughts came into range. It started with a single burst of energy, a flash so bright that it nearly blinded the fleet's sensors. The wave of energy hit one of the smaller cruisers, and within moments, the ship's shields collapsed. The ship was torn apart in a matter of seconds, its debris scattering across space like dust. Captain Eric's heart dropped. The battle had begun. "Report," Eric shouted as alarms blared across the bridge. "Shields down on the Theta cruiser." Lieutenant Kara called out, her voice full of urgency. "Hull integrity is failing. They're not going to make it." The crew of the flagship scrambled to their stations, but it was already clear. Earth's Dreadnoughts were far more powerful than anyone had anticipated. The fleet's ships fired their weapons, but the energy blasts from the Dreadnoughts were overwhelming. Even the most advanced energy shields failed to hold up under the assault. "We can't take much more of this," Kara cried out. "Our shields are down to 60%. We need to retreat." Eric slammed his fist on the command console. He knew that retreating wasn't an option, not with the fleet already in battle. "No, we stand and fight. We'll buy time for the others. Keep firing at their lead ships. Focus on their weapons systems." The bridge crew continued their work, launching wave after wave of energy blasts at the incoming Dreadnoughts. But it was like throwing stones at a mountain. The Dreadnoughts didn't even flinch. Every shot they fired had the power to obliterate entire fleets, and no matter how hard the Galactic fleet fought back, it didn't seem to make a difference. "Captain, incoming," Commander Davy shouted, his face pale. "We're locking onto multiple graviton pulses. They're targeting our engines. Brace for impact," Eric ordered. The first graviton pulse struck just moments later, and the flagship shook violently. The entire ship lurched, and the lights flickered as the gravity inside shifted unexpectedly. Eric stumbled, grabbing onto the console to steady himself. "We've lost power to engines," Kara shouted, her voice filled with panic. "We can't maneuver." Eric's mind raced. If they couldn't move, they would be sitting ducks. The dreadnoughts could surround them and tear them apart without resistance. "We need to fix this," Eric barked. "Get the engines back online. Now." But it was too late. A second pulse struck, and this time, the shields of the flagship buckled under the pressure. The ship groaned as if it were alive, and for a moment, it seemed as though the flagship would split apart. "We're losing shields," Davy called out. "Hull breaches on multiple decks. We can't take much more of this." Eric gritted his teeth, but he refused to give up. If the flagship fell, so would the entire fleet. "Get the backup generators online. We need to push through this." But the truth was starting to sink in. Earth's dreadnoughts weren't just ships. They were a force of nature. No matter how hard the fleet fought, the dreadnoughts' energy weapons and graviton pulses were too powerful to resist. The galactic fleet was fighting a losing battle. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, the other ships in the fleet weren't faring any better. Smaller cruisers and destroyers were being torn apart, their crews helpless against the overwhelming power of Earth's warships. The dread in the eyes of the crew was palpable as they realized the true scale of the enemy's strength. Eric watched helplessly as one of the destroyers was hit directly by a graviton pulse. The ship's engines exploded, sending the wreckage spiraling into the void. The crew was gone. Another casualty in a battle they couldn't win. "This is madness," Kara shouted, her hands gripping the edge of her console as she fought to stay calm. "We're losing everything. We need a new plan." Eric looked out into the vastness of space. The dreadnoughts were closing in, their energy weapons charging for another round of fire. They were so close now that he could see the massive ships clearly on the view screen. The dreadnoughts were everything they had feared and more. But despite the overwhelming odds, Eric refused to give in. He had seen worse situations. He had been in battles where the odds were stacked impossibly high, but he had always found a way to win. His mind raced, searching for something, anything that could turn the tide. A thought flashed in his mind. An old, risky maneuver. It would be dangerous. It would take everything they had left. But it just might work. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance they had. "Davy, I need you to get in touch with the fleet," Eric said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Tell them to fall back and form up around the flagship. We're going to use ourselves as bait." "Bait?" Davy echoed, looking at Eric in disbelief. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Captain? We're barely holding on as it is." "It's our only shot," Eric said firmly. "If we can draw them in close, we'll have a chance to hit them with everything we've got." It was a desperate move, but in this battle, desperation was all they had left. The battle raged on. The once proud fleet of the galaxy was now on the edge of defeat. The dreadnoughts moved like an unstoppable force, each one unleashing devastating blasts of energy that shattered the fleet's defenses. The flagship was battered, its engines barely holding together, and its shields flickering like a dying flame. Captain Eric stood at the center of the chaos, his face tense as he watched the view screen. The dreadnoughts were closing in, their powerful weapons charging for another strike. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. Every instinct told him they were about to lose everything. "We're down to 30% shield strength," Kara said, her voice strained. "We can't take much more of this." Eric nodded, trying to hide the growing panic inside him. The battle was slipping out of their control. Earth's dreadnoughts had proven too powerful for the fleet to handle. But there was one last chance, one final move that might turn things around. "Davy," Eric called out, his voice steady. "Get on the fleet comms. Tell them to fall back and form up around the flagship. We're going to use ourselves as bait." Davy looked at him in confusion. "Bait? Captain, we can barely hold on as it is. Are you sure about this?" "We don't have a choice," Eric said, his eyes locking onto the massive dreadnoughts on the screen. "The fleet can't fight them head-on. But if we draw them in close, we'll have a shot at hitting them with everything we've got." The gamble was risky. The fleet would be exposed, vulnerable, and without enough firepower to defend themselves. But if they didn't take this chance, they would be wiped out. It was a hard decision, but Eric was determined. Davy hesitated for a moment, then nodded grimly. Understood. I'll relay the orders. The fleet's ships began to shift into position, reluctantly following the order to pull back. It felt like the calm before the storm, a brief moment of quiet amidst the chaos. Eric felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders as he watched the ships move into formation. The Dreadnoughts, noticing the sudden movement, began to advance. The massive warships closed the gap, their energy weapons lighting up the space between them and the fleet. The fleet's ships braced for impact, knowing they were drawing the Dreadnoughts closer with each passing second. Kara looked at Eric. "Captain, the Dreadnoughts are taking the bait. They're closing in fast." Eric nodded. "Now we have to make sure we don't fail." The tension was unbearable. It felt like the calm before a thunderstorm, with everything on the line. The flagship's remaining energy reserves were pushed to their limit as the crew worked furiously to prepare for what was coming. The gamble they were about to take would determine everything. The Dreadnoughts fired first, a massive beam of energy that hit one of the smaller cruisers dead center. The cruiser exploded into a cloud of debris, its remains scattered in all directions. But Eric had anticipated this. The fleet had drawn the Dreadnoughts close. But now they had to survive long enough to make their move. Brace for impact. Eric shouted as another blast slammed into the flagship's shields. The ship shuddered under the force of the blast, but the shields held for a moment longer. "Ready the counterattack," Eric ordered. "Fire everything we've got. Focus on their engines." The flagship's weapons systems powered up, and Eric's hands gripped the command console tightly. The fleet's remaining ships, though battered and weak, fired everything they had left. Energy blasts shot toward the Dreadnoughts, but the enemy ships barely flinched. The gap between the fleets closed even more. Just as the Dreadnoughts prepared to fire again, Eric gave the command. Now, the flagship's final trump card activated. A powerful energy pulse fired from the heart of the ship. The blast shot forward, striking one of the Dreadnoughts directly on its massive engine core. The ship buckled, its massive frame twisting as the energy pulse disrupted its systems. It didn't explode, but the Dreadnought faltered. Its shields flickered, and for the first time, the fleet had a chance. "Yes," Kara shouted, her eyes wide in disbelief. "We did it." But Eric knew it wasn't over yet. The Dreadnoughts were still formidable, and the fleet was running low on resources. "Keep firing. We have to keep them off balance." The fleet unleashed another barrage of energy blasts, this time focusing on the weakened Dreadnought. The attack was far from perfect, but it was enough to keep the Dreadnought off balance. The enemy ship's movements became erratic, its shield sputtering as it struggled to regain control. But there were still more Dreadnoughts to contend with. "They're not out of the fight yet," Davy warned. "We've only taken down one ship. The others are still charging their weapons." Eric's mind raced. The fleet had made a dent, but it wasn't enough. The Dreadnoughts were still a major threat, and the fleet was running out of time. "We're not finished yet," Eric said, his voice resolute. "Prepare for the next phase. We have one shot at this." The battle was far from over, but the fleet had a chance. For the first time since the fight began, the odds had shifted slightly in their favor. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them hope. The flagship trembled as another blast from the Dreadnoughts rocked its hull. The crew braced themselves, their nerves stretched thin after hours of battle. Despite the damage, the flagship was still fighting, its weapons firing fiercely, its shields flickering but holding strong. But they were running out of time. Captain Eric stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The Dreadnoughts were relentless, charging their weapons for another devastating attack. One of the larger Dreadnoughts had been damaged. Its shields were down, but the others were still intact and ready to unleash hell. The fleet was hanging on by a thread, with only a few ships left. and each blast from the enemy threatened to finish them off. "We can't keep this up," Kara said, her voice filled with frustration. She was doing everything she could to stabilize the flagship, but the strain was too much. "We're down to our last energy reserves. If we don't do something soon, we'll be sitting ducks." Eric clenched his fists. They couldn't retreat. The fleet had already taken too many losses. If they ran, they would never survive the chase. The only option was to keep fighting. He had one last move to make, one final shot at turning the tide. "We need to finish what we started," Eric said, his voice low but firm. He turned to Kara and Davy, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm going to give the order to launch the final assault. We have one chance left, and we're going to make it count." Davy looked at him, his face weary but resolute. "Are you sure, Captain? If we do this, there's no turning back." Eric nodded. "It's the only way." The crew had been through so much already. The fleet had lost so many ships, and the lives of countless crew members were on the line. But Captain Eric knew that they couldn't give up now. If they were going to fall, they would do so with honor, fighting until their last breath. "Prepare the fleet for the final push," Eric ordered, his voice ringing through the bridge. "Focus all firepower on the remaining dreadnoughts. We're going in." Kara quickly began relaying the orders to the rest of the fleet. "All ships, fall in. Focus fire on the remaining dreadnoughts. We're pushing forward." The fleet, battered but determined, responded. The remaining ships moved into position, closing the distance between them and the dreadnoughts. Every ship in the fleet was giving it everything they had left. There was no room for hesitation. They were about to risk it all. The first dreadnought fired, a massive blast of energy cutting through space. But the fleet was ready. The remaining ships responded, launching everything they had in a single coordinated strike. The blast from the flagship's weapons hit one of the dreadnoughts directly in its engines, causing the ship to shudder. But it wasn't enough to finish it off. "Keep firing," Eric shouted. "We need to break their defenses." The fleet continued to fire, their weapons lighting up the battlefield. The remaining dreadnoughts retaliated, their energy weapons tearing through the fleet's shields. Another cruiser was lost in a flash of light, its debris scattered across space. But the fleet didn't stop. The flagship took another hit. This time, the shields gave way completely, and Eric felt the ship shudder violently. He could see the crew struggling to maintain control, but they were not about to give up. "We can do this," Kara shouted, her hands moving quickly across the controls. "Just a little longer." The remaining dreadnoughts were now in their sights. The fleet had weakened their defenses, and the last of their energy was focused on bringing down the remaining enemies. It felt like an eternity as the ships fought, but the tide was beginning to turn. Eric could see the massive ships of Earth faltering. Then, as if by some miracle, the flagship's weapon systems locked on to a final target, the largest dreadnought of all. Eric's heart pounded as the countdown began. "Prepare to fire," he called out. "On my mark. Fire." The final blast shot from the flagship, a beam of pure energy that tore through space and slammed directly into the dreadnought's command center. The massive ship buckled under the impact, its shields collapsing. For a moment, it seemed like the entire ship might explode, but it didn't. Instead, the dreadnought veered wildly off course, its systems failing one by one. The fleet held its breath as the enemy ship slowly drifted, lifeless. The other dreadnoughts, seeing their leader fall, hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all the fleet needed. "Now's our chance," Eric shouted. "Finish them." With one final, unified effort, the fleet poured every last bit of power into their weapons. The remaining dreadnoughts were overwhelmed. One by one, their shields failed, their engines exploded, and they were consumed by the might of the fleet's final push. Silence fell over the battlefield. The once mighty dreadnoughts were nothing more than burning wreckage drifting in the void of space. The fleet, battered and exhausted, had won. But the cost had been high. The fleet was almost entirely destroyed, and so many had fallen in the battle. Captain Eric looked out at the aftermath, the wreckage of the dreadnoughts scattered around them. They had won, but at what cost? He sighed deeply, knowing that the victory was bittersweet. They had stopped Earth's invasion, but the galaxy would never be the same. "We did it," Kara said quietly, her voice filled with disbelief. Eric nodded, his eyes scanning the stars. "Yes, we did. But it came at a great cost. Let's make sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain." The fleet had won, but the war was far from over. The galaxy was now safe, for now. But Captain Eric knew that the battle for humanity's future was just beginning.